while we've been here in Egypt, Yusuf's brother has made, handmade vases with power tools, and he did it by hand. So, we've been scanning those as well.
Yeah, we scanned those.
I mean, that's the other thing. The Step Pyramid, all of this data comes from Jean-Philippe Loyer, who excavated there for a few years, but there were people excavating there for 20 years before him. So who knows how many were down there. But Loyer got 40 to 50,000 of them. The museums and the Orthodox story, they have to admit that, these vases are inherited, because some of them have poorly scratched glyphs that trace back to the 1st and 2nd dynasty. It's one of those chambers above the king's chamber. I found this Khufu glyph. We've got evidence that he built a pyramid. Somebody sampled it. Who was that? Was it the ministry? I suspect there's a strong possibility they probably dated it and they're like, oh shit, it's 150 years old or whatever. Like,
it just doesn't seem that those people that these things are attributed to had those tools to make these kind of vases.
I do think that this investigation is important for humanity. You can't really hit an ancient culture or religion that doesn't have origin stories involving cataclysm. And then turns out, oh my God, in the last 20 years, this actually happened.
They drilled in front of the Sphinx and they found a granite.
Everyone's first time in the Black Pyramid yesterday. I mean, it's very impressive, like labyrinthian nature of all these.
So tiny passages and
I was
even they had the big granite boxes in there.
This episode was made possible by Shining 3D and its remarkable device, the FreeScan Combo Plus.
Penman Kerkwyk, welcome on the show. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for the invite. I mean,
fucking amazing view.
Good opportunity. Yeah, not bad. As far as views go, not bad.
Cheers.
Indeed. Thank you, sir. Cheers. Nothing like a Guinness in the morning.
So how did you get involved in this entire alternative ancient history and technology topic?
It's been a bit of a long road. I mean, I've always had an interest in history. High school, my mother was a history teacher. So it was kind of, that interest was bred into me. I nearly went that way in university, but, Orthodox kind of history, the Romans, Greeks, very interested in that. And I think, I went into IT, but I'd end up, as many people did, I think around the 2010 time frame and 2009, I was following Joe Rogan. He's interesting. He has Graham Hancock on. I think I'd read Fingerprints of the Gods years before that. But then it was like Hancock's first appearance on JRE, like way back when, like when it was at his house in the 2010, 2011. Really took my interest, like from a number of perspectives. One was the history side, but also his talk about consciousness and, I guess altered states of consciousness and how they can be beneficial. That became part of my journey too, but I ended up following Graham quite closely. And then so on Twitter at some point, I think it was 2012, he's like, hey, I want to write a follow-up to Fingerprints of the Gods. I'm going to Peru to do some research. Who wants to come? Like, it was a small group, and I was like, shut up, take my money. And I jumped on this tour. So in 2013, I spent a couple of weeks in Peru and Bolivia with Graham. And actually, Brian Forrester was on that trip as well. He organized it. And that was pretty much the beginning of the rabbit hole for me. Like, just you spend a couple of weeks with Graham. It was phenomenal. A couple of years after that, in 2015, he was doing a similar thing. He said he's going to Egypt to do more research and do a tour. And this was billed as the debate tour with Zahi Hawass. So Zahi, we spent a couple of days with Zahi. They had this, infamous non-debate. There's clips of it on the internet. I was actually in the room if you look at some of the footage of the Q&A, and not when Zahi had his outburst, but during the Q&A, and they were talking about Göbekli Tepe and the Younger Dryas and Sphinx erosion. Yeah, it pans around the room, I'm sitting there in the crowd. So it's fascinating. And it was actually on that trip that I met my now like long-term friend and brother, Yusuf Aywan. We took a day off and I'd met Yusuf. So that was...
Well, this is his balcony, actually.
This is, where we should thank Yusuf. Yeah, we're on Yusuf's balcony, which, as you can tell, has a phenomenal view from Nazl El Famam. But yeah, and that was it. Like, so it was, I'd met Yusuf and I was like, I spent a day with him, day and a half. And I'm like, I have to come back. And because he took us to Abu Sir, and that place is full of these tube drills and saw cuts and all of this very compelling evidence for sophisticated machining. stuff that really isn't explained in the orthodox historical record or accounts. Very mysterious. I had like an engineering background, and so I was fascinated by that. I'm like, I've got to come back. And like 6 months later, I came back, spent a couple of weeks with Yusuf, and I was like, all right, that's it. And it just became this obsession. And eventually I ended up, I think around 2016, quit my job to go try and pursue it full time and figure out how I could, I guess, put some of this information out there. At the time, it was an interesting convergence of things, technology included. So it was around that time where you started to get the proliferation of consumer grade sort of high quality video equipment, like these gimbaled cameras we're using. The first, like that big bulky Osmo came out, and it's like, okay, now you can go to these sites 4K, you know, and record these get stable video that isn't like some shaky hand camera. And no one had really done this, I think, where you take a high quality look at these sites and then use that footage to tease out information that up to that point I think was buried in books, like people that were really interested in the topic you're reading.
Black and white photos and...
Yeah, like all the concepts, you know, the Schwaller de Lubitz and John Anthony West and Robert Schoch and Beauval and Hancock. So all of this, you know, this really interesting and compelling alternative perspective on historical mysteries. It's buried in books. I don't think that had really been teased out and presented in a new media format. So that's kind of the slot that I saw was an opportunity to try and do. That's what I wanted to do, was to talk about some of these concepts, do my own research, but then present it in a new media way, in like a high quality footage and, you know, fresh look at the site. So most of the footage at that point, we used these documentaries, like big studio documentary, do an hour-long documentary, like Fox did one, you know, Zahi, they're down in the Osiris, stuff like that. It was big budget documentaries, and platforms like YouTube lets you take, I think, a much, you know, you can look at smaller details and spend an hour looking at that.
Yeah,
you know, like,
definitely.
So that's what led me into it, and it's been an amazing journey since then. For personally, very fulfilling, and I'm super thankful that people have, to some degree, found it entertaining and engaging enough where I can actually keep doing it. So
yeah, you dragged me in.
Yes,
I was on this March tour this year.
Yep.
It was fascinating. It was actually the trip of my life,
Thank you.
because I really wanted to explore Egypt since I was a kid.
Yep.
And I was actually doing presentations on Tutankhamun in primary school because I was fascinated about this entire thing, but I was only focusing on the mainstream part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went on your tour, first ever experience in Egypt. It was amazing.
And here we are again. Yeah.
And here we are again.
Yeah. It was great. And I you know, I do love that part. I mean, I started doing a few tours. I think this is, you know, I've been to Egypt a lot now. The tours are great. I mean, I originally started it in order to do my own research, like, because of the tours, like, you know, we do a lot of special permissions, as you know. I think we did 10 on that. It was ridiculous on that March tour. It was amazing. And then, but there's a lot of places you can't go without these special permissions that cost thousands of dollars, and you got to work with the Ministry of Antiquities, and there's all this paperwork, and we thankfully had the connections to do it. So that the tours presented an opportunity to do that bit of research, spread that cost out across a group where everybody gets to experience it. I get to do some filming and look and get a first-hand look at things. But it's since developed into something I find really enjoyable. Like, I love taking people and showing them a lot of these mysteries, and we do get a lot of people like engineering focused people. My channel has that sort of technical focus, so I tend to attract a really interesting crowd of intelligent, sort of educated people that are interested in a lot of those engineering details, and they come and fall down that rabbit hole. And, you know, you're not the first one that I think that's it's sort of taken over their life a little bit and has become something to do. But it's awesome. Yeah,
it's completely changed my life. I can say that. Yeah,
great. It changed mine, like 100%, like massive career change, 180, and it's I'm very thankful that it's happened. Like, I wouldn't I love doing it.
What kind of engineering you did?
Well, I started engineering, ended up in computer science. So I started doing engineering at university, but I ended up in computer science. I graduated eventually computer science, but I was always intended to do like computer systems engineering. It just turned out I really like programming and things like that. So I did that. I started there, and I ended up my IT career was in the networking field, R&D. So we were, you know, as part of, I went through marketing in Australia, moved to Singapore, and then moved to the States nearly 19 years ago now to work in the global group in R&D, and ended up in the CTO, the Chief Technology Office for the networking part of Hewlett Packard. So yeah, it was fun, and I mean I enjoy that career. I still enjoy IT, and that certainly helped me in this endeavor. Like if you're that computer geek, always the kid doing everything. So I've when you do it, you just learn everything and you do it yourself. The tools
on the fly,
and the technology, all of that stuff. So that's been good.
And when did you have time for Metallica?
Metallica? Metallica's been a constant. Metallica's been a constant.
When did it start? Which interview was that?
Oh, it was the Andrew Schultz interview. Yeah.
Flagrant or?
Flagrant, yeah. I mean, he was funny, dude. That was so, I laughed so hard. He was before we started recording. Andrew's like, so what do we call you? And it's like, I'm like, well, I don't know, independent researcher, content creator. He's like, that shit's boring, something funny. I'm like, well, you're the comedian, think of something. And he's like, all right. And then he pops on as like, everything you know about ancient history is wrong, and we've got a roadie from Metallica to tell you all about it.
They were also dressed up, right?
They dressed up, yeah. That was amazing. I walked into the studio. It's a big they've got like a floor. It's not just the studio, they've got rooms there, and they were all dressed up. I was like, what the hell, if I knew. And he was super excited. Like, Andrew's been to Egypt. He was...
With you, or?
No, not with me. He went on his own. He was, in fact, after the podcast, we're looking at the excitement of Nazareth al-Samam.
I hope we can filter all this noise.
It should be good. I like these mics, but yeah, he, we sat there for like an hour after the podcast looking at his pictures in Egypt, and he was DMing me saying, man, I'm up all night looking at vases, so he was very interested. And I had watched his show, and I was sort of ready for, you're going to make jokes, they're going to interrupt, it's just this comedy podcast. And I was like, I'll go wherever. I was really relaxed. I was like, you guys go wherever you want. I don't mind. And it turns out he actually was really, he just let me talk for a lot of it. I kept talking about stuff, and we did things, but he was, I think because he's genuinely fascinated by these topics.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful to guys like him, like Joe Rogan, that are interested, and they have these massive platforms, and they can bring some of these mysteries and expose them to a wider audience. It ultimately, get more people interested, it helps everyone, and it's just, it's great. If we didn't have some of those platforms, I don't think this topic would be as popular as it is. I think it is endlessly interesting for anyone that has a curious mind and is willing to investigate it, but it's not the easiest thing to get into in the first place. It's complicated, there's a lot of nuance, but it's fascinating.
These are very deep rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And wide. You can go many ways, drill holes, saw cuts, vases, a lot of things.
It's endless. And I've been doing it full time, and it's been, even before that, it was something I thought about a lot. I was researching it a lot, and the rabbit hole does keep getting deeper, and I've yet to hit a point where I'm not fascinated by some of these things. You know what I mean? I just think there's so much nuance in even some of the smallest details, like the machining marks or things like that. But it's even broader than that, like what it means, how it impacts the overall story, how it compares to what the orthodox versions of events are, the evidence of things like the dynastic Egyptians doing stuff, what they wrote about, how they used tools, the products that they produced, comparing that. It's just, to me, it's endlessly fascinating, and I'm glad people seem to like those topics being explored.
It's getting more and more popular, I think, this kind of archaeological or archaeology-related, history-related, strange new findings.
I think so too. I've seen it grow. I think there is, because there's new evidence coming out, right? I think that's a big part of it, that we're at a point where new technologies are being applied. Also, I do want to credit the field of Egyptology and archaeology itself is also doing this. You have Scan Pyramids project. They are embracing some new technologies.
Yeah.
Whether or not we hear about the results in a timely fashion is another question. I'm pretty sure they've been into this big void, or at least endoscopically into it.
Well, they discovered it in 2017 or something like that.
And I know they've been doing work in those chambers above the King's Chamber. We were there. We were here in February and March, and the big ladder was strapped to the railing of the Grand Gallery.
Still there?
No, it's gone now, but there's still cables and even before, like years before, there were no power cables running up there, and now there is. However, my hope for, I think what the change these sort of investigations might engender is ultimately, I think archaeology, Egyptology is a sub-discipline of that. I hope they do become a bit more multidisciplinary than they currently are. Like it's unfortunate that the pushback that some of the, I guess the, tenured archaeologists, guys like John Hoops or Flint Dibble have, their insistence on being an expert on every aspect of anything ancient. It's like the comment, I think Chris Dunn originated this, but I steal it and use it all the time, which is, you wouldn't ask an archaeologist to design the chair he's sitting on, but if it's an ancient chair, he's going to claim expertise over every aspect of it. And that's what happens. And you look at archaeology today, yes, they take input from geologists when it suits them. Sometimes geologists like Robert Schock might come out with, Danny Hillman, Nada Wajaja in Gunung Padang in Indonesia, they come out with findings that they don't agree with, and it's like, pseudoscience nonsense. But when, geology agrees with them, they use those findings. I just think it needs to be broadened out to include a lot of other disciplines of science, including engineering, including manufacturing, chemistry.
There are some experimental archaeologists. I will interview one next year probably.
Yeah.
They are doing this kind of real life experiments on how these things were polished, carved, etc.
Yep.
So I think, but that's probably rare.
It is, and it is something that has happened before. I mean, in some of my videos, I do, like Dennis Stocks, for example, was he's an experimental archaeologist, Egyptologist, and he had a mechanical focus. And to his credit, he did do, and Mark Lehner, he worked with Mark Lehner, and he was at Roger Hopkins, I think, was the stonemason they worked with, a series called, The Secrets of the Obelisk. It was on Nova, a PBS documentary in the late 90s, and they were, this is where you see that footage of them using a bow drill on a copper tube and sawing with a drag bar on granite. And these are all experiments that should be done. Like and his data, in fact, I use a lot of his data because he went and defined like how long that takes to grind through granite, how much copper you lose, the rate of cutting, pounding stones, how long that takes. And it's great data. I think the unfortunate thing is that there was very much a predetermined outcome in mind when they did it. I don't like that part of it, but I do think those experiments are absolutely worthy, and it's part of, say, the VaseScan project. We should be doing experimental archaeology. What does it take to make one of these things? How good can we make one by hand? How good can we make them with just power tools? Then how good can we make them with our modern machinery, like CNC and all that type of thing? This is 100% something that should happen, and I think it would be valuable data.
Do you know the titans of CNC?
Yeah, I do. I have a lot of people suggesting I should talk to them and see if they're interested.
I tried to contact them ask them to make a vase, but no answer.
I should do it. Maybe I can swing but I've had that comment a lot, like, you guys should get these titans of CNC to try and make one. Yeah, that's the sort of thing we should do. Adam Young has done, Adam Young, obviously, with Artifact Foundation, the guy who really started the VaseScan project. He's part of what the work he's done recently is to actually have a granite manufacturing company try to replicate a relative, the original vase, no lug handles, but very precise. The metrology's been done on it. And he gave them the STL and said, can you just make one the best you can with the equipment you have? So those sort of things are happening.
But the result was not even close to the OG
right.
vase.
So they pumped it out, and it was like an order of magnitude, at least, if not a couple off in terms of precision. And that was using the best tools they had on a lathe to turn it, a big metal, proper lathe.
They had to polish by hand, I think, with power tools.
Yeah. And it didn't come out anything like the original, which is an interesting data point. And while we've been here in Egypt, Yusuf's brother has made, handmade vases, not on a lathe, but with power tools, and he did it by hand. So, we've been scanning those as well.
Yeah, we scanned those.
And I think that'd be an interesting data point. Like, ultimately, it's like the more data, the better in this case, right? The bigger the data set, the more conclusions and I think evidence we can draw from it. And I'm so happy to see the progress that you've been making with Adam and in chasing down museums and getting access. And I tell you what, there's some, not to give away the game here, but there is some very promising things on the horizon, I think, for this project and for the data we might collect.
Yeah.
Yeah, super happy about that.
And maybe we can finally put this provenance thing away, and
yes,
if we have enough data, it should not be a question anymore if it's impeccable provenance or not.
Yeah, so that is, and look, it's a legitimate question, right? I mean, when I first published the vase scan videos, I mean, there were the pushback immediately is about provenance. Now, for a variety of reasons, I genuinely don't think there's really a good argument to be made about suggesting they're fakes or they're not the genuine artifact. However, the goal from day one was always to get into museums and to scan artifacts with impeccable, as good as you can get, like impeccable provenance. And that is happening. And in fact, we have, even on this trip, I think, we can put that one to bed because we were so you go look at the Twitter photos that I posted, like you'll get a clue for what some of the artifacts we were scanning. I mean, straight from the source, people, let's put it that way. You can't really argue provenance with those. However, on the provenance thing, I think there's a logical argument that I think discredits a lot of the suggestions that these things are modern fakes, right? So for me, one of the big ones is Mark Vist's work, the design, like the mathematical design that's now been shown to exist in multiple of these very precise granite vessels, the radial traversal pattern. So I think he's shown that there is this mathematical design behind them. It's not just an artisan that's crafting it by hand and eye, but there's a specific mathematical design behind them. And obviously these ones are also, very precise, like they're aerospace levels of precision in terms of, a couple thousandths of an inch standard deviation for concentricity, roundness, that type of thing. So those two things alone, like just getting that precision result is extremely, we can do it, as Chris Dunn would say, like, yes, our capability and our civilizations, we could totally do it. However, it would be tremendously expensive and very time consuming to do in a material like rose granite or, these very difficult materials to work in. They're not homogeneous materials. You go from
crystal inclusions and
your feldspar to quartz to mica, hornblende, varying in hardness, and so getting that tolerance down to that level, and then very thin. So all those aspects of those vases would be extremely expensive to do it. And if you're making a modern fake, there's no reason to mathematically design them. I mean, nor is there any reason to make them that precise. And because of the cost associated with that, even with the vessels that go back, where we have histories that trace them back to, say, the 1980s or the 1960s, as is the case for several of them,
it would be very hard to do this kind of accuracy and precision back then.
I think it would be really challenging in those timeframes. Also, not remotely cost effective if your objective is to put something on the antiquities market and sell it. Because honestly, these vases weren't really worth a whole lot until
a few bucks. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it might be a few hundred or even 1,000. I mean, back then, people were more interested in statuary and things with writing. That's like, it's just a vase. Like, how do you know it's an ancient Egyptian vase? People were less interested in those as opposed to artifacts on the market that had writing or their statues of ancient Egyptians. So they weren't worth much, but then, the vase scan videos comes out, they've really gone up in price on the antiquities market. So I don't think it would have been effective to have those made back then and try to sell them off as fakes. And so you're left with this, okay, so, I mean, is it a practical joke or, it's some sort of long 50-year-old practical joke? Doesn't seem to make sense either. The last sort of point that I think when we get into these discussions about provenance is people, I don't think most people that argue it understand the antiquities market, how it works. Like even in museums, you find a lot of stuff that's from private collections, right? There's not everything has, like, we know exactly where it was found.
Even Flinders Petrie was buying vases on the street next to the excavations.
Exactly. That's a great point. Even Petrie was, buying stuff that the locals had, and, it's in museums now. Or that type of thing. So provenance is this, the more provenance on the market, the more expensive. And if it's too much, maybe Egypt asks for it back because it depends on how it came out of Egypt. There's a lot of stuff that's legitimate. There's a lot of stuff that was taken. I mean, Adam was telling us some of the accounts. I mean, I mean, people have kind of doubted the quantity of vases that have come out of Egypt, but there are accounts of literally 1,000 or 2,000 going out in a day from particular
Adam
sites.
knows a private collector who has only 200.
Yeah. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, he knows people with 300 vases, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see if there was 100,000 or more of these things in circulation still today out there. There seems to have been a tremendous quantity of them. So it's, and to be fair, we have now also scanned vessels with impeccable provenance. Like Adam has one that we've scanned that does go back to, when it was extracted from Egypt and given to, I think, an ambassador in the 1930s. It was in museums. It's gone into private collection. He now owns it. Matt Bell has vases with impeccable provenance. There's one he has that I think he just tweeted about that goes back to the 1880s. They know where it was recovered from. You can trace its steps all the way into his possession today. And, he gets a set of calipers out, and okay, the top lip is within 1,000th of an inch of being perfectly, X and Y axis.
I think if we collect enough data, this won't be a question anymore.
I agree. And look, that's not to say that there aren't fake antiquities on the market, but typically...
Matt Bell also said that he might have a fake.
He might, yes. Yeah, it's possible. And in fact, it might even be more possible now because of the interest in these vases. But, fake antiquities, typically you're talking paintings, statues, mosaics. There's a big business, carpets, things like that are named, like these tile mosaics are like, some of them are worth a fortune. And there are people faking those. I mean, it happens. But as you say, more data, I think the problem evaporates, particularly once we get in to more museums. You guys were in the Petrie Museum. I mean, that stuff's impeccable. We have several in these private collections that have scanned that are impeccable, and there's certainly seems to be more opportunities with museums coming up in the future.
Yeah, we already have those planned. I submitted the research plan to the Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy. And also Adam is organizing a trip to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston.
And they have the biggest collection in North America, right? They've got stuff. I think they might have 15 or 16 on display, but apparently like 300, 400 vases, something like that, in drawers that have not been touched for like 50, 60 years. And I'm particularly interested in that too, because it's Harvard and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston that were the guys who were excavating Kush and like northern Sudan and the south of the dam in like 1904, 1905. And these are the controversial sites that people come at me about with Toshka and other places. We have photographic evidence of some of these vessels, but I think some of and they get described in the reports as we're not sure is pottery ware or stoneware, but I think from the photographs, I think 100% there are stone vessels there. So maybe that Museum of Fine Arts actually has some of those things. We'll see.
Do you want to comment on that claim that was made by Night Scarab, I think?
About Toshka and these sites? Yeah, I'm happy to. I have commented on it. I do these presentations. We talk about Toshka. So there's two things. The primary point that I'm making, and I'm using those as an example, is that these vessels are pre-dynastic, right? So this is not controversial at all. The controversy comes about how pre-dynastic are they, and to me it doesn't really matter. You end up with the same set of problems in the mainstream historical account, whether you say it's early period, like this is like first two dynasties, archaic period, first two dynasties, Nakata II, like the precursor cultures to ancient Egyptians, or you're going all the way back to these Neolithic cultures, Toshka 15,000 years ago, that type of thing. It's the same set of challenges. Like these are all of these things. We know the cultures existed. We have the burials. They're very similar in that they're very primitive, right? The fetal position, shallow burials, very, very poor pottery, like handmade, low quality pottery, and there's flint tools, and there's, it's fish bones and beads and combs. Like it's really, and then you have these stone vessels, and you find those archaic period. You find them in the pre-dynastic times with Nakata, and I am just from the photographic evidence, and it seems like they have also found these in these burials that stretch back into those late Neolithic period. So I use Toshka as an outlier to say these things can exist, and looks like they did exist back to here, but it doesn't matter. I mean, you can have Toshka. It's the fact that they're pre-dynastic, right? There's just no technology. I don't think those people were making them either, right? I think it seems like they didn't have the capability. However, as a culture, as a primitive culture who's working in pottery and who's working with stone tools, if you found a granite vase that's perfect, like looks perfect, you would immediately recognize its value. It would become a high value item. It would filter up through the social structure. We'd be buried with the king. And that's
this imitation situation in the museums.
Right. You can go to any museum worth its salt with a decent collection in the pre-dynastic section. You will find hard stone vases.
And they say it's imitation. When the pottery has these spirals, these dots, they probably were trying to imitate the granite.
Yeah, they literally say
hard stone vases.
Yeah, the Cairo Museum, you see, one of my favorite pictures is, and we can insert it in the video. It's a granite vase, and next to it's a pottery vase, same shape and everything, and then they've dotted it to make it look like granite. In the British Museum, there's a pottery vessel with the swirls to imitate the breccia. And it actually, even the label there, I like that. It tells you, it's like, well, the stone vessels were very expensive and only rich people could have them. But for normal people, the pottery vase could magically supply the benefits of this thing in the afterlife, and it's imitation. And I think imitation is a common theme. I talk about a lot throughout dynastic Egyptian history, because the reason to me the vases are so important, the fact that they're pre-dynastic, and it's not an arguable thing. And the other fact with them is they stop. Like literally, the production of them seems to stop after the 4th and 5th dynasty, with a few exceptions, but not many.
Yeah, you don't see new dynastic hard stone vases.
Right, exactly. And it's like, well, did they lose this, suddenly just magically lose their capability to make these things? Or
it was not important for them anymore?
That's right. They valued alabaster better. That's what it was. Imhotep just liked alabaster, so he decided to make some crappy imitations in alabaster, and that became the superior technique. It's crazy, but I mean, after that period, it's alabaster, and it's much softer, and you can tell they're handmade. It's the tale of two industries, but imitation's a big part of that. And the technological link with the vases, like the tubular drills, the precision, the marks, the witness marks, that to me connects them to a lot of these other categories of artifacts in ancient Egypt, like statues, obelisks, columns, boxes, slabs, and even some architecture. And the vases have this, they're unique in that they're small and they can be buried with someone, right? So I think what happened is, like Djoser in the 3rd dynasty, either found a lot of them beneath the step pyramid, or he hoovered them all up and
they were probably also excavating, like we do.
They literally say that. They say that he collected a lot of them from other burials, or he recovered them from other burials. He sent his dudes out to go rob other tombs. He got like 40, 50,000, who knows how many. I mean, that's the other thing. The step pyramid, all of this data comes from Jean-Philippe Loyer, who excavated there for a few years, but there were people excavating there for 20 years before him. And who knows? These are probably some of the vases that Petrie was buying off the street, So who knows how many were down there? But Loyer got 40 to 50,000 of them. And then it's like I think they just collected them all. And even the museums and the Orthodox story, they have to admit that, these vases are inherited, because some of them have poorly scratched glyphs that trace back to the 1st and 2nd dynasty. See the same form in pre-dynastic burials where these vessels have been recovered. So we know the vases stretch way back. They stop in the earliest times in the dynastic civilization. They have a technological link to these other artifacts that are much larger. Like, you can't bury an obelisk with you. You can't bury a Serapeum box with you. And so they persist throughout the culture. And these sites get inherited, reused. And, some dude in the New Kingdom in the 19th dynasty, like Ramses II or Meren Ptah, decides, like, I'm so high and mighty, and I have the arrogance and the hubris that I will carve my name into it. And we look at it thousands of years later and say, well, it's got Ramses' name on it, therefore Ramses must have had this made. So the vases are super important. I think it provides a link for the possibility that a lot of this other stuff was inherited also and just reused.
Well, we see cruel scratches and inscriptions on alabaster vases. But you had this interesting idea in the museum that probably they were losing the sharpness of the tool bit with what they use for scratching these glyphs.
One thing I've always noticed is, again, this is something I first saw in the Cairo Museum, but you see it in the new museum now too, and also at the Imhotep Museum at Saqqara. is that the very early, some of the inscription work in the Archaic Age, first 2 dynasty stuff, even though you see it's handmade, like the line, it's not square or whatever, it's fine, but it's actually the nature of the inscription is very fine. Like it's as if they got it. It's not like hammered in or chiseled where you see later periods where it's got a thickness to it and you can see the individual impact marks. This looks like something that was literally just incising almost through the stone, like a very fine, sharp tip, very fine, and it's these fine scratched lines, and you just don't see that sort of thing later on. Like, yes, you see very high quality hieroglyphs later on, typically in larger items. That it became a high art form and they were very good at it. You see great hieroglyphs in granite, but look closely at the obelisks in Karnak or whatever. You look in the corner, you can still see how it's been done with chisels. However, this other stuff's interesting. I was like, maybe it was those Archaic Age guys who had these vessels. It seems possible that they had some, maybe the tooltips, they had some of the gemstone or whatever it was that was inscribing these vessels. Maybe they had them and then, they used them up. They used them to inscribe and then that sort of disappears because you really don't see that sort of very fine lines. And we'll maybe put some pictures in here. I have several so people understand what we're talking about, but that sort of disappears as well. So it's almost as if they had, you could imagine there were tools, there had to have been these tools that could work this stone effectively, and maybe they just had the tooltips and if there was machinery they couldn't operate it, but they could use the tooltips by hand to inscribe these things and it would cut through that stone seemingly effortlessly, and it's very, you're talking about it's like diorites and
very hard sounds,
insanely hard stone. It's not easy to carve, but they seem like they could carve it.
I just don't understand why some trolls or people in the comment section still thinks that we attribute this to aliens or other things. It's just so annoying. It's very simple.
Welcome.
I mean it just doesn't seem that those people that these things are attributed to had those tools to make these kind of vases and objects.
Right. Yeah.
And it can mean that we didn't find those yet.
Right.
And we will at some point.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Hopefully.
But it's just annoying that it's seemingly they just don't get the picture.
Welcome to my world. Yes. Yeah, that happens. That's been happening forever. And look, this was Michael Shermer's technique when he debated Graham Hancock, the first debate on JRE. He immediately tried to roll up Graham with every other ancient alien theorist and just address the whole lot as crazy. If you bundle everyone up together and say, see, these people over here are crazy, you're part of that group, I can just call you all crazy. And I get it constantly. You get comments all the time, oh, you must think aliens do it. I'm like, I've never, ever said that or suggested it. It's a common, very common, just discrediting and straw man attack. Even the Scientists Against Myth guys, that I thought it was hilarious. I use it in my slides. They did a thumbnail we're talking about the Petri core or whatever, and it's a thumbnail is me, Chris Dunn, Petri core.
With alien,
the dude, and there's an alien in a spaceship and green tinge on it. It's like, you can see the tone. This is the tactic. And it's frankly ridiculous. It's childish, but it's a tactic that just continually gets used. And I don't subscribe to the ancient alien theory. I don't think you need aliens to explain it. That's not to say that there's not something interesting going on in the world.
Yeah, but that's a different story.
But yeah, it doesn't. It's silly. I just laugh at it mostly these days. I'm
waiting for the moment when I will get these kind of claims.
Oh yeah, it'll happen.
I'm trying to approach these things from an engineering point of view and perspective, but still, sometimes I get this comment: "Get a real job. These are bullshit."
Yeah, of course, it happens. It's the nature of the beast, and honestly, that getting a reaction is good. I think even if it's negative, it means that you might be getting somewhere, right? When you get people's attention and they react to it. Look, there's always going to be, in my opinion, people that will never accept the data. They will never accept the conclusions and what the data means, and they'll find any way to try to discredit what's happening and what's going forward. I think the data ultimately will triumph here. It's gaining speed. I haven't done a proper Vase update video. I'm working on one for a while, but there's been a lot happening over the last, I think it's been nearly a year since I put a video out, so it's time for an update on that stuff. We just had so many more vessels scanned now between Matt Bell and what you guys are doing, and just it's really cool. I think the data will ultimately show the truth of this, and it will become very difficult to object to. I mean, that's the thing too. People can't object to the data, even with the original first vase.
They can. They told me, you are an electrical engineer. That's why you cannot scan it properly.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And also people told us that you guys are manipulating the scan, like you haven't, all this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's why I made a video how to do the scans, or how we are doing the scans. And, well, it's not that popular.
No,
actually.
It's technical, right? But look, that's the thing. I mean, these are professional metrologists who do this, and this is entirely industry standard procedure. You have to do with that. It's the vagaries of the technology, right? It's you get reflections, you get errant sort of points of data that are way out here that obviously aren't part of the object. You need to clean them up. We even talked about it when I was interviewing, Nick's here and Alex Dunn. We mentioned it, and it's part of the process. It is what it is. We also have done physical inspections. Like that was very valuable when we went to Danville and we did physical metrology inspections, old school with the tolerance gauges, and you can see it. I mean, I think that helped a lot of people to understand it.
We also did that in the P3. I mean, we had these gauge calipers or one, and Chris King was handling it. So, and we really, we scanned one pottery from this painted pottery from the Nagada period. We scanned one of that, and very pristine, it was an alabaster from I think 18th dynasty with a pristine provenance. Yep. It was a bit wacky, but that was the best ways they had with the stable and ground stable provenance.
Welcome back to the Ancient Technology Podcast. If you enjoy the show and want to help me creating high quality episodes, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. You can find those links in the description. Your support gives you early access, a say in the podcast direction, and exclusive perks like post-show bonus content. Most importantly, it helps me travel to meet guests in person, which is a key to producing the most engaging and in-depth episodes. Thank you for considering, and now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, and that's important, and we did that also, right? So some of the work we've been doing is and it's a focus I've had for the last couple of years is, you tend to, when you start, you focus on like the obvious precision and the best artifacts. It's also important to look at what were the handmade artifact, like the less precise ones. And we're collecting that data too, because that's the thing with particularly these vases, that tale of two industries is very, very evident. And the Imhotep Museum does it wonderfully, where you have on one side the hard stone vessels, and they tell you these are older. They predated Imhotep, who was the architect for Djoser.
For the step pyramid.
But he was a polymath and a genius guy that he came up with a procedure. They literally say this on the wall. He came up with a procedure for, grinding and creating these alabaster vessels that are replicas of these hard stone vases. And then, on the other cabinet wall, you've got all of these alabaster vessels, and you can literally look at them and see, okay, it's not symmetrical. It's not.
Did you ever wonder if those drill holes and saw cuts are modern things?
I've had that comment a lot. So people have often suggested that maybe you're looking at the result of, modern, relatively modern, right? Whatever, the last 50, 100 years. I don't think they are, for a number of reasons. The basalt, for example, the basalt pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid, you can find pictures where they literally built a road over that thing. There was bitumen over it. There's actually little patches of bitumen on the left on it.
That was completely reconstructed. When Petrie found it, or I don't know who found it, but Petrie was working on so it was crumbled.
Not
totally
all of it. It's been a lot of it.
Pieces.
There were sections of it that were still in situ.
Okay, yeah.
Like the middle, you can actually see the best parts of it that are like very flat. That's the original. And then it's slowly been added to. And Mark Lehner these days and the British guys are cementing up the edges and adding stuff. They're covering up a lot of the saw cuts actually by doing this. However, here's the thing that I always tell people is like, if you think these are modern, then why is it Flinders Petrie who's documented them? That's the thing. Like Petrie documented the saw cuts. He's documented the tube drill holes. He found the cause. And we're talking like late 19th century, 1800s to early 1900s. Industrial age, and it's not, they don't have a DeWalt tile saw at that period to go and cut these things. It's not like that. And you actually, in a lot of them too, you will see wear and tear and the effect of the ages, the patina, and just there's we were looking at the basalt saw cut at Abu Sir, for example, and the surface is pitted. It's obviously been weathered heavily. that, if that's a fresh cut, it wouldn't look like that even after 100 years. So while it's, I've actually found, and I should use this in a video. So you go to a place like Bastet, they have drilled, like you can find where they've done modern holes. Like they've been doing something to like a granite block to, I don't know, prop it up or do something. And yeah, the modern tubular drill holes look a lot different, and you can tell they're modern. They're much fresher looking than the ancient holes. So you can make the comparison between the modern and the ancient. And then I think for a lot of those ancient examples, the fact that you have Victorian era guys, documenting it, I mean, they're not modern.
Yeah. Big question. What do you think about these guys in the background? Because Hancock thinks that these are definitely dynastic.
Yes, I know. Long answer, as usual. It's complicated. So I think that, and this is, I'm good friends with Matt from Ancient Architects as well, and I call him mainstream Matt these days, just a joke. We get along really well, but yeah, he sort of swung a bit more mainstream with the pyramids, and a lot of people do suggest it. And look, there's certainly some evidence that, I think the evidence, things like the carbon dating of the mortar, I think you can't really use that to say the whole structure was done, 200-300 years prior to the 4th dynasty, which is where it's one of the problems they have with the dates. The archaeologists don't often use them because it doesn't really fit their timescales, although it's close, within centuries.
The carbon dating is off with 1 to 2 century.
Yeah. All right. So, but that's one of the reasons why they don't like it, because they're pretty confident that, Khufu, they know when he lived, and they really he built it. So they try and say stuff like, well, they made charcoal 200 years ago and they were still using that charcoal then. I don't think that's very plausible. They're just making that up. Like, it's just, they're trying to explain the date for their context. I think what it tells you is that they were worked on. I mean, these dates, the data and the points where they've done even the stimulated optical luminescence dating and the carbon dating, it's typically around the outside and the casing. It means that they worked on it. Hello. Okay. We're at Yusuf's house. This is how it's going to go. So I think the only really legitimate conclusion you can draw from that is that, yes, they were worked on. And I believe they were also worked on. I think that that there are aspects of things like the Great Pyramid that are very problematic when you try to explain it within the context of the Old Kingdom or the dynastic Egyptians, right? The precision of it, the alignment of it, the fact that the longitude's encoded into the dimensionality of the Earth is encoded into it at 143,200, like the ratio of the northern hemisphere, the polar radius of the Earth, when you multiply it out by 143,200, the height of it gets you the polar radius of the Earth. You take the perimeter length of the Great Pyramid, multiply it by 143,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And as we've developed better satellite technology to measure those things more accurately, those numbers have come closer together. You compare the ratio of the perimeter length of the pyramid to the socle that it sits on, which is, this much different. So, it's slightly longer perimeter length. That ratio is exactly within very close to the exact ratio of latitude to longitude on the planet, given that we're an oblate spheroid and a bit further east-west than north-south. So, and there's an endless number of other things that it's like it seems like they didn't have the technology of what we know of them to be able to execute those things. But
no one knows how they were built.
No one knows how they were built. I agree, but it does seem like they were worked on. And I think they're a multi-generational project. I think there was something there. My opinion is that there was something there predating the dynastic Egyptians, whether it was a complete pyramid or not, or it was, the casing stuff, or they repaired on it.
Well, you see this reconstruction idea in South America. There's a pyramid inside a pyramid inside a pyramid, and
yes,
they were building on these sacred sites over time.
They were, I think so. And I mean, the middle pyramid is one that fascinates me because it's like the bottom layers, the bottom 7 or 8 courses, it's just massive, megalithic. Like you can look at that thing and see there were different construction styles that went into it. Like it's almost like different periods of construction. Like the middle of it's sort of not as well done as the bottom. So maybe was it originally like a platform? Was it like a more mastaba, and then it eventually became a pyramid? I mean, I think so we were looking at the step pyramid the other day. it's still 450,000 tons or something. I believe that's dynastic. Like, I think they definitely built that. You can tell smaller blocks, it's all mortared together. I got no problem with that. I just, ultimately with all of this, my conclusion with the evidence I think that comes from this technology that's involved, you end up with one of two possible answers. One is you either have to say the dynastic Egyptians did this or they didn't do it. Now, so if they did it, now you've got to explain all of these, advanced aspects of the evidence, which means that ultimately we should be, if that's the case, we've got to rewrite our understanding and history of the dynastic Egyptians. You end up in a place where you have to rewrite history either case. If you don't think they did it, then they must have inherited it and somebody else did it. I think the evidence overwhelmingly supports that latter case, in my opinion. I think it's the tale of two industries, right? My whole thing about you've got advanced artifacts and primitive artifacts in almost every category of stonework. So from columns, boxes, obelisks, statues, vases, even pyramids. There's an advanced side and there's a more primitive side. And now the more primitive side, the Egyptians drew how they did stuff on the walls. We found the tools that they used. It's all explained by what they said and the tools that we found and everything we know about them. The primitive side, you see these hand-hammered boxes, or you've got the alabaster vases and they wrote literally nothing, and there's no depictions at all or anything at all that explains the more advanced side. So you have this tale of two industries, and you combine that with the extension of the human timeline, the obvious new evidence over the last 50 years for cataclysm. Like, we now have humans have been around, we know, for potentially up to 700, 800, 900,000 years.
You mean Homo sapiens?
Homo sapiens, yes. So we have fossil records going back like over 300,000 years, but the genetic studies of when we split from a common ancestor with the Neanderthals, who are our cousins, the studies into dental morphology, tooth morphology, the evolution, how do we get the teeth we have, those are all suggestive of older numbers, 700, 800, 900, even 1,000 years. So you combine all of that stuff, and particularly with cataclysm, which is the big key to it, it seems more and more plausible to me that there was an advanced civilization. There could have been an advanced civilization that may be responsible for some of the stuff we see. And then that explains inheritance, it explains imitation, it explains the cultural, just appearance of Egypt. Like, that's this other huge contradiction, right? It's like they just seem to have popped up out of nowhere and did all the best things first. Like, it's the biggest, the Sphinx temple, the Valley temple, the pyramids, that's all Old Kingdom. It's the first thing. And their language comes out of nowhere. Boom, full culture. It's just, cuneiform, for example, evolved over time. We have evidence for this. Hieroglyphs, it's just there, and it starts, and it's like, boom, here it is. It's not really how civilizations evolve, but it's if you have a kickstart and a cultural memory, and all of a sudden you get a population basis that grows to a point where you can start to unify and do some of these things, I think it makes more sense. So I think either case you got to rewrite history.
You're getting to this point when we need to acknowledge that they had a sophisticated lathe, because we see this, turning marks on the vases.
Yep.
In the step pyramid, down there, in the lower catacombs, or not the lower ones, but down there, and
there's
what
a lathe.
the hell?
Yeah, and this all predates it predates the wheel. The use of the wheel. In the orthodox story of ancient Egypt. It's obviously an application of the wheel, but you look at what we know of the Old Kingdom dynastic Egyptians, they didn't use the wheel. They did later, but in Old Kingdom, there's no...
Wasn't it that they didn't invent this...
Axle?
Axle, yeah, sorry.
They would drag stuff on sleds. They eventually got to chariot wheels and axles, but they didn't... There's very limited or almost no evidence that they used the wheel in the Old Kingdom. It was all... Everything they showed was dragging on sleds. There was no pulleys, force multipliers. A lot of this stuff predates the use of the pottery wheel. Even the pottery is hand-formed. It's not thrown on a wheel. But obviously there's a wheel involved because the lathe's there. And one of the entertaining things for me in the vase scan discussions have happened is those goalposts seem to have shifted a lot with the skeptics on it. And now they're like, well, yeah, they had lathes. They must have had you can do this with a wooden lathe. Like, yeah, you just get a lathe and, you're pumping the pedal and you get a water wheel or whatever. And yeah, you could turn it. It's totally doable. Like, it's complete nonsense, but it's funny to see how it's like finally the evidence is like pushing this is what happens, right? The goalposts sort of shift. Like, yeah, they had lathes. Like they had lathes. They were basic lathes, but you could do it. And so, and because, I mean, even Petrie said this, it's undeniable. I mean, people ignore that aspect of Petrie a lot, but he was saying in the late 1800s that they had lathes.
100 years of deception.
Yes,
Right?
the 100 years, yeah. I do like that title, like the sheer
Petrie was already wrong.
the sheer hubris of calling Petrie like a
Let's call them
deceptive.
scientists against myths did that. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you're including Petrie. Like, that's just offensive. Like, how arrogant are you to suggest that Petrie was making shit up? Well, I don't know. I don't understand it. But that's welcome to the internet, I suppose. Right?
Yeah.
It's if you make traction in something, other people are going to try to ride its coattail and criticize it and make money off it and all that sort of thing.
I just have to learn how to not take it personal.
It's difficult. I know a lot of people that are big in this field that do take that sort of thing personal. I mean, I have a philosophy that's probably different to a lot of people. Like I'm a fan of what like Dan Richards, for example, does, and we've swapped some messages. He was gonna come on this last tour and then he couldn't, I think. And I'd love to meet him and I'd love for him to come to Egypt and see some of this stuff too. But I mean, there's a lot of people, and there's certainly a lot of attention being given to people that are, the back and forth, the reaction style content. And I honestly never play. I have no interest in playing that game. I get it, and a lot of people probably like to see it, and it would probably be popular if I did it. But I don't. I stay in my lane. I like to think I do my own research. I put my own material together. I'll put my perspective out there. People are free to criticize it, and they do. And yeah, it's a free world. Make your content, but I don't feel like I'm under any obligation to directly respond to it. I've certainly addressed some of the points, and there's some legitimate points that get raised. A lot of it is just logical fallacies. It's misrepresentations of what you say, or it's just ad hominems calling you names and things, which, by the way, I find to be also, like, you get called a grifter or a scammer, or you're just doing it for money. I'm like,
yeah,
no, I was and could make a lot more money in IT. I do this because I'm interested and it's my passion. And it's like, I do question the mindset of people who take that approach, and they
spend energy, effort on making a criticism and doing these videos where they are just cherry picking misspellings and understood. I don't know. It's just disgusting, in my opinion.
It is, yeah. And some of the tactics. I mean, this happens at like YouTube level where I'm at, and then it happens in the media level with Hancock getting called racist. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on. It's at every level, and a lot of it is kind of despicable, and I think some of it is also quite questionable logically. Like, I always enjoy the people that literally say, "Oh, you're lying deliberately," or "You're grifting," or this sort of thing. It's like, imagine being so confident that you're correct in a field where, admittedly, it's a very foggy set of evidence. So you thousands of years of occupation and scant evidence, and it's all been jumbled up and turned around, and there's little bits and pieces here and there. You're trying to build a picture out of it. Even the mainstream story is full of holes. Like, it's an interpretation of this evidence. There's lots of different interpretations, I think.
Yeah, they're finding new things every year.
Yeah, and it changes, but but just imagine that you are so confident that you're right. Then there's literally no room in your head for any other explanation for other, like, alternative perspectives other than you must be deliberately lying. So the people that say that about me or other people, it's like, it tells me something about their mental faculties, where it's just like, I'm so confident that I'm right, then the only option left is you must be deliberately lying. There's no room for alternatives. I might be wrong, and I think there's, about all of it, who knows? If we end up finding out that I am, but it gets us closer to the truth, happy with that.
What do you have to see or experience to change your mind on all of these?
Oh man, it would be difficult. If somebody can replicate, like if somebody can replicate the tube drill markings effectively, if somebody could make a vase, if somebody could move 1,000-ton stone, Like it's so I have this. I don't say everything's sort of magical space lasers and stuff. And I don't say any of it is, but I'm fairly careful about what I say they could, or the dynastic Egyptians. Of course, this argument extends to Peru and other parts of the world too. But I'm pretty careful about what I'm pretty careful about what I classify as advanced ancient technology, and it comes down to three things for me. It's like the machining marks, right? So the stone, like the obvious, the stone cutting, the drilling, the polishing and things like that. Precision, measured precision, not just eyeball precision. So vases, symmetry is an aspect of precision. The work that Chris Dunn's done on the Ramses head, things like that. And then logistics. So it's those three categories. So logistics being, I think it's possible to move stuff 100, 150, maybe even 200 tons short distances with these manual techniques that they say they did, where you're dragging stuff on a sled.
But not everything is scalable.
But so I think once you get up into that 400, 500, 1,000, 1,200 tons, and some of these objects are being moved like 1,000 kilometers, which they were, and there's evidence for a massive single-piece statue at Tanis, roughly the same size as the Statue of Liberty, that's more than 1,000 kilometers from the quarry. You've got a 1,000-ton statue at Karnak made from composite quartzite, which is 600 miles from the quarry in the Red Mountains in Cairo, and that's upriver. That has to be taken against the current. So it's those sort of achievements no one's ever demonstrated to me, I don't know of, that's even remotely possible with these primitive methods. Same thing for the machining marks. No one's demonstrated that you can replicate them. Same thing for the precision. No one's demonstrated you can replicate them. So you'd have to tick all those boxes for me to... It's like Chris Dunn's has a set of conditions for experimental archaeology, right? So if you claim, and I don't make this claim, I don't say I know how these things were made. I don't. But the people who do, that say, oh yeah, this was done with, I'm rubbing on it with rocks and sticks and sand, right? That's how they say mostly it's done. Then to prove that, you need to replicate that achievement, but you have to consider the hardest, you can't exclude the hardest aspects of the problem. You have to include all the aspects of the problem, including the most difficult ones, and document it and then compare the results, right? That's the thing. Like you have people that, they'll you can get 3 stones and lap a piece of granite really flat. Sure. You can get a block and a stone chisel, and you can make like an inside corner on an outside piece of a block. And a lot of people do that and they say, see, problem solved.
Size.
Yeah.
In very small size.
Yeah, small size.
Let's do it in a fucking box or room-sized box.
Well, yeah, or do it in a box, and like, you can't get chiseled down. You've got to keep it. So there's other challenges on the inside of the box, but more than that, with some of these artifacts, it's the and Petrie said this about the Lahoon box that we're going to see. It's the proportion of scale. It's the relative geometry, because these are single piece artifacts. How do you keep this wall parallel to this wall and perpendicular to the lid and the sides perfectly? And you get to a point with these single piece artifacts where you can't fix mistakes by removing more material. The geometry has to be considered. The design, like how do you explain the mathematical design behind the vessels? How do you go from a mathematical design to essentially, close to damn perfect execution in granite? So there's a lot of these little details that I think, for me to be convinced that you could do it in a primitive fashion, they'd have to be satisfied, and no one's come even remotely close to doing it. Yeah.
Back to the big statues. Have you heard about the natron theory?
Natron, this is the
Hungarian dude making the geopolymer.
Oh, okay. I've heard lots of geopolymer theories and like stone softening and stuff.
So his idea is basically to use natron, this salt, heat it up on the granite, and this will basically chemically decompose the granite. Right. It will leave some granite grains, but it will produce water glass. And if you mix this water glass with an activator like wood ash, which has some aluminum or other metal content, he can basically cast stone and put those granite grains back to this as a filler.
Really?
And he thinks that almost all of these huge megalithic stones were made with this technique. Like statues, even the vases. I think it was his opinion about the vases as well.
So I don't think so, is what I would say probably. It's like vases aren't just granite either. You have all sorts of, porphyries and other types of stone with very large crystal inclusions, like huge chunks of quartz.
If they have drill holes or core drill marks, why you need to drill if you can pour it or cast it?
Exactly. So there's a lot of problems with those. I mean, you can also find examples of boxes and statues. I mean, several of the boxes Serapeum have that. There are statues in the Luxor Museum, for example, that have this, even the new museum. We literally have veins of feldspar, natural veins of other material running through the stone, which you wouldn't have if this is a geopolymer that's being mixed. We have quarries. We have quarries where they're being dug out. We can see the shapes.
You have the quarry just around the pyramids.
Well, yeah, for limestone, yes.
For limestone
so
quarries,
you can literally see where they're cutting blocks off, but we have the granite quarries too, where they're literally taking these shapes out of it. I think every block's a different shape and size, and if you needed molds, you need individual molds for all of them. I think there's a lot of issues with the geopolymer theory. However, I mean, if people want to experiment and try to make it happen, then great, then do it. I mean, as Chris Dunn said, send me a bag of it. I think you can make a fortune in the landscaping business, with some sort of geopolymer granite.
Because that would solve the transportation issue. Because you can put it in bags and you can make it on site, yeah.
Well, why were they cutting out a 1,200 ton obelisk then in the quarry? I mean,
he thinks those scoop marks are the actual result of these etching. When they heat it up, this natron salt on it,
to like remove stone,
and then they can. It's not softened, but it's becoming softer, and then you can break it off easily with the pounder.
Maybe. I mean, there's something going on with those scoop marks, and who knows? I mean, it seems to have been a very, I can't imagine it's just there's nothing that's going to just scoop out granite in its natural state like that. Something's involved with those scoop marks. Because they're not just the little indentations. I mean, there's big, deep ones around that second unfinished
They
obelisk.
are shifted in a certain angle.
Yeah, right. They're articulating. Yeah, like they start straight and they do this like a backhoe arm almost. But I think it, in some of the depth of some of them with these big ridges, it's like something's happening. Like it's, who knows what, like plasmoids or ultrasonics or it's something. It's not purely mechanical and hammering. I don't think it's pounding stones either, but who knows if it's some chemical stone softening. I mean, this is the thing when you get into like the how did they do some of this stuff? This is where it's beneficial to consider theories like that, like a geopolymer. I mean, I think we should be open to all these ideas and investigate them to the best of our capabilities with open minds, because that's really the only way we'd get closer to the truth. I think we'll end up finding that lots of these theories probably aren't any good. But that's fine. That's the scientific method. Like you test something, if it doesn't work, you sort of modify it or you discard it, you update your hypothesis and you go again. I think that's the only way we get closer to the truth, is to really have an open mind with these ideas.
Yeah.
And technologically speaking, I consider the range of possibilities to be very wide. Like we have this perspective on technology that's the sum total of our current knowledge. But we know that, it's this wide, and in 1,000 years or 100 years, it's this wide. We're going to learn more. We learn more all the time. So you can pretty much confidently say that we don't know everything about everything.
Yeah.
There's endless things. We don't know anything, really. There's endless things we don't understand. We're updating our knowledge all the time. To me, it seems quite possible that someone in the past could have gone down avenues of science and technology that we haven't really pursued in our civilization. And maybe some of those answers lay out in those areas. And
like a different branch of technology has been forgotten.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think there's a lot that's a possibility. What isn't helpful is blindly adhering to the idea that everything we see in the past is purely a subset of what we know. Like it must have been primitive. It must be, we would solve this problem this way, therefore they must have solved that problem that way too.
Well,
I don't think that ultimately is helpful. This is why I'm like, if we're a bit more open-minded about investigating it and we applied ourselves and our considerable scientific capability, we might actually learn something. Like we might get closer to the truth.
Well, the Scan Pyramids project is trying to learn something new, because as I heard, there are companies and universities involved in this stuff. Yep. They are applying modern technology to scan the pyramid, for
Exactly.
example, and they want to learn something because they probably aware of that we don't know everything.
That's a great example. And same with the Vase Scan project. Like, we are applying ourselves and our technology, and what happens? We're learning. Like, we're learning incredible things about these vessels. And Mark Vist's work, I mean, the mathematical design behind them and the depth of precision that's in them. I mean, we're learning stuff. It's because we're applying ourselves. It's fantastic. I wish this sort of approach would be maybe a little more embraced by the people that actually have the real access to these sites and the funding to do stuff.
Well, it seems like it will happen.
I hope so.
Seems like.
Yeah, I think the pressure's mounting. It's a generational shift maybe, in as it is for many sciences, right? It's science that can advance sometimes one funeral at a time, and it'll happen. I agree. I think it will happen. I think there's too much interest, too many people that have a lot of expertise in a lot of other fields that are now taking interest. They're doing things. Yeah, I'd like to think it'll happen, and maybe we'll end up seriously having to reevaluate our past and our role. I also think it's important. Like, I'm writing a book, and I don't often talk about it in the videos, but I do think that this investigation is important for humanity. It's very altruistic, but I think that this idea that we're taught in school from a young age, of course this isn't the truth, but it's, this idea that, all right, we're Stone Age, and when we ancient Sumeria and Mesopotamia starts, the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Chinese, etc., and we end up where we are now. Like, it's this linear path from the Stone Age to, as John Anthony West would say, striped toothpaste and space shuttles, right? It's like this idea that we're the only advanced civilization ever. Like, this is what it looks like. How we operate and what we've done, it's like a predetermined path, and you don't have to worry about it. This is how civilization happens. So just don't worry about it. Keep going forward. I think if you fundamentally change, this is why it's important. I think if you could fundamentally change that zeitgeist, that understanding that instead of this linear path from the Stone Age, and that's what humans are, and we're the first time we've ever risen to this height, I think if you could shift that idea to this cyclical nature between, the heights of civilization and cataclysm, the fact that even though we've risen to great heights in the past, we were then struck down by cataclysm and forced to start again, pushed back to like a hunter-gatherer existence, the Stone Age, and that on a long enough timescale, that's going to happen again, which seems inevitable, right? It might take thousands of years yet, or it might take who knows. We could do it to ourselves, but it's like at some point, something like the Younger Dryas can happen again, and you knock back down if you even survive it. So I just think that if you can now ultimately change that perspective to something more cyclical, from like this linear straight line to like, all right, we're on this giant cycle between civilization and cataclysm, that might engender some changes in behavior for our civilization. I mean, a little less money on tanks and guns, maybe a little more money into space exploration, solving the true long-term problems of the species. Like I said, very altruistic. But there are precedents. Whether you agree with it or not, I know we've had some fun discussions about this over the last couple of nights about like climate change, right? Doesn't matter where you stand on the issue. I think what you can look at climate change and say over the last 20 years, that term, it's forced a change in that zeitgeist of humanity. Like, it's shifted how we interact with each other. It's changed how we invest. It's changed how we behave. It's shifted us as a species in a probably a positive direction to try and, all right, let's not pollute and all this other stuff. But it is possible. So that's what I'm saying. I use it as an example of how do you change a zeitgeist like it's a concept that changes behavior.
And a lot of ancient cultures has this cyclical or story of the cyclical nation of humanity.
Yeah.
This is not a new thing.
Yeah, the Vases,
we're
all that
just trying to forget these.
The Yugas, right? All that stuff. Yeah, it's exactly. And it would always be an embracing of like what we've done in the past, because people knew about cyclical natures. I mean, it's in all of our stories. It's literally baked into our religions and stories. Legends, yes. Every story is destruction of civilization by flood or fire. It's one of those fascinating aspects to this. It's like, how come, doesn't matter where you go, you can't really hit an ancient culture or religion, or even modern culture or religion that doesn't have origin stories involving cataclysm by flood or fire. And then turns out, oh my God, in the last 20 years, this actually happened. We're like massive floods, and then 10% of the world's biome was on fire at one point, and there's some truth to some of this. What do you know?
What do you think? Why these ancient sites are somehow maybe in architecture? From an architecture perspective, they are somehow connected, like the megalithic polygonal stones in South America or here, or in Easter Island. Why? Do you have an idea of?
I suspect that they're all either offshoots, maybe slightly different versions or evolved aspects of a common ancestor culture. Yeah, I do. I think. I mean, it's funny with the megalithic walls. I mean, it's like you want to build a wall. It's like, okay, you can understand how arrow tips and flint arrow tips evolve, right? It's like we're trying to solve a problem. We need to like get at something that you can spear a antelope with. So people solve that problem in sort of similar ways all around the world. We've seen that evolve. Now, if you want to build a wall like that, like there's a lot of ways to build a wall. Like you can get cobblestones and mud mortar. You can make mud bricks. You don't have to make it precise. It's literally, you're seeing examples of the most difficult method possible to build a wall that seems to have evolved in different time frames in different parts of the world independently. And I just don't think that's what's happened. And there's too many similarities between these examples, like the Coruscantians, like bang on for a lot of the stuff in Egypt. The
Perfect example in the Valley Temple.
Yeah, Valley Temple, right? This is ridiculous. How do you build? Like it's like, let's choose the hardest possible method to make this incredible wall, like 80-ton stones and no mortar and just perfect joins. And same thing at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. You see like the big walls of the Moai on Easter Island. You see similar stuff in ancient Turkey as well. Zanaki Tepe, for example, looks completely megalithic. So I do think that those similarities are probably indications of a shared precursor culture. Maybe it was a different time frame. Maybe it was an offshoot of that culture that did it slightly differently, or it could have been the same culture. It's just you can't date that stone, unfortunately. Places like South America, it's pretty clear the Inca didn't do it. They built on top of it and they repaired it. But yeah, I mean, there's that, and there's many other indicators that seem to all point to the possibility of this global precursor civilization. Like that's what I think is the most likely explanation for it. I don't know when they existed. A lot of people seem to think like, well, was this just pre-Younger Dryas, so 15, 20,000 years ago? I think the possibility for this civilization could be much further back in time, hundreds of thousands of years possibly. I'm not fixed to the Younger Dryas as being the source of of all of the flood myths. Certainly, probably is responsible for some of them, but there were also other cataclysmic periods before that. You got the Bolling Alarod, the Elder Dryas. I think the range of possibilities for that culture could be a long way back. And, it's not the similarity in architecture is not the only indication of that. Hamlet's Mill, the work of those guys that show there's, astronomical numerologies consistently encoded in stories all around the world, even in cultures that weren't really observing the sky. All of that seems like this idea of like this data being encoded and then deified and mystified into oral tales and stories about gods and pantheons that filters down through, and then it takes the study of a lifetime for some people to actually put that back together and show that it suggests that.
Well, the Egyptians were talking about or writing about Zep-Tepi.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the cultures themselves have histories that go way back. It's 40,000. I mean, Egyptians, those stories about Zep-Tepi is roughly 40,000 years, I think, is their history.
When the gods walk the earth.
Yes, they're magical, mystical beings. It's any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic, right? That's the quote, and that may well be the case. I mean, they seem to describe it. Viracocha and in South America, and all of these tales that seem to indicate there's some sort of magic. It's magic because they don't understand it, but that's just technology. At some point, could be.
Back to these guys. What do you think about the graffiti in the Great Pyramid?
Oh yeah,
it's very interesting. I've just recently seen this video when Zahi Hawass and another reporter, probably BBC or something.
Yeah,
they're climbing up. This section is chamber or place there full of graffitis, modern graffitis from
Belzoni and all these guys.
First World War or I don't know,
Yep.
English people, French people, and there is a pristine red ochre graffiti
Khufu.
mentioning Khufu.
Yes, there is. It's in. I think it's called the Davidson chamber. It's one of those chambers above the King's chamber.
They're
I wish I
relieving chambers.
So, well, they're not. Yeah, they're called relieving chambers. They're not relieving chambers. That thing's freestanding in there. It's quite impressive, really, what they achieved with that. But yeah. So it's again. Look, there's been books written about that glyph. You know, it's a long story. It's my opinion, and people will disagree. Some people may agree. I think the most likely scenario for that is that probably Howard Weiss probably did it. And I know Hancock and stuff. People say, well, it seems to curl under the stone. The glyph was, you know, and then it's covered. Some of the stone covers the bottom of it, but like we don't know unless we peel it up and look. He could have been clever enough to paint it where it was, you know, it looks like it goes under the stone, but we just don't know if it does go under the stone.
I heard that those glyphs were not deciphered until, I don't know, Zahi or some modern archaeologist came along.
No, Weiss claimed like that was he was the one who said, "Oh, we found evidence that Khufu built it."
Because this is a special name of Khufu.
It's his name, and there are some problems with it, I believe. And I'm going off memory here with this. I think there were some problems with what was written there, but it is his. I believe it's his cartouche, so they knew what that was. Like it wasn't. Somebody sampled it. So this is the other thing. There's a long history of intrigue about that glyph. So you may remember a story where there are a couple of German guys that got accused of defacing the pyramids and chased out of Egypt, and then Zahi Hawass pursued them to Germany, and they ended up being prosecuted in German courts, and lives were ruined over this. I've actually spoken to them, or through an interpreter friend. I have a document. It's a video I've been meaning to make for a long time because it's intriguing what happened. So this was also all documented by Robert Bauval, and his website doesn't have it anymore, but he used to have a blog section on his website, and you can use the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive to go find it. Go look at Robert Bauval's blog section and read that carefully. The sections where he's talking about the Khufu glyphs. So and he's got photographic. He shows you what's happened. So so first of all, the glyph. So he's been up there several times between him and Hancock. They went up there several times. So they have photos of the glyph when it's sort of pristine. There's no evidence of sampling. Then there's another photo where a small section of the Shen ring has been taken. And this is prior to these German guys getting in there. And then they get in there, all this controversy happens, and we'll explain that in a minute. And then there's a photo of after, and that photo of before and after, it's identical. It's the same, but the same little piece is missing. So somebody sampled it. The German guys got in there on a private permission. They got their ladder, got up in there, supposedly took like the tiniest little fragment of red ochre paint with the intent of trying to date it. And then the word got out about what they were doing, and Zahi made a massive international fuss. You can probably still find all the articles about it in the international news. Huge fuss. And they, like I said, he pursued them back to Germany. Eventually, they were prosecuted for something in Germany. Like their lives were really ruined. So I think that's really interesting. Like I think that why did he make such a fuss over nothing? Was it maybe so that he could create so much outrage that no laboratory would work with these guys to do anything like date the red ochre paint? And in that case, I mean, the sample that was the big sort of, I mean, I say big like this, but it's missing.
Yeah.
Somebody sampled it. Who was that? Was it the ministry? Probably, like that, you know.
It's still sus that why the results are not public.
Exactly. And so if you are convinced that's Khufu, then just sample it and carbonate it and tell us. Like you can carbonate it today. Like go do it tomorrow. Get a piece and carbonate.
It would be conclusive evidence.
It would be. And it would be front page news. I suspect there's a strong possibility that they probably did sample it and they did what someone sampled it and that they probably dated it and they're like, oh shit, it's 150 years old or whatever. Like it. And now you combine this with the stories of Weiss at the time. And again, I'm simplifying and it's hearsay. I might be wrong, and I haven't read all the books about this. Is it what I've read? Is that Weiss was running out of money. His excavations at the time, he was running out of steam. You know, he'd been in those chambers for a while. You know, they're all busted open and they're in there, which is like, why didn't you discover this before? But you know, and then it's like his benefactors, some baroness or something like this, they're coming over. One of his funders were coming over, and he needed a discovery and it just so happened that just before this person came over, he's like, oh, I've made this discovery. I found this Khufu glyph. We've got evidence that he built the pyramid. And it worked. He got more funding and he could continue his work. So you put all these pieces together. I mean, it seems to me possible that he might have painted that in there. Now, I could be wrong. Like I said, very complicated. Books have been written about this topic, but I think that's a possibility. It's interesting. And I just think at the end of the day, like you said, just sample it. To go and test it. Like, it seems like you can date it. And if you find that that's original, okay, then somehow 4th dynasty in Khufu must have built that structure inside the Great Pyramid. I mean, that's what it means. If it actually dates out to that, then okay, fine. I'm not going to argue with. I mean, I understand there's vagaries and inaccuracies in carbon dating, but if it comes back at roughly the right time frame, fine. Like, I'll accept the data. It's like I accept the data with the mortar dating, but again, I don't think you can take that and say they built the whole pyramid.
Yeah.
I think they worked on it. Yeah. And we know they renovated and worked on lots of stuff. I mean, the stele of Khufu's daughter, the inventory stele, talks about Khufu repairing the Sphinx.
Yeah, exactly. But they say it's just priests made it up
It's like they don't like the evidence, so they just dismiss it. But
the calf part,
yeah,
is already flaked off from the dream stele.
Oh yeah, right.
And they say let's insert. It was already just calf.
Yeah.
And they inserted, or they thought, it should be Khafre, so that's why Khafre built it.
Yeah,
that's one of the arguments.
Right. And the fact that it's attached to the middle pyramid complex.
Yeah.
That's also supposedly Khafre, which is, I mean, this is one of the things about taking people there is you sort of impress upon them the scale of works that's involved in a pyramid complex. It's not just the pyramid. People go, even the Great Pyramid, okay, 6 million tons, 2.5 million blocks, whatever. 1 block every 5 minutes if you do it over 25 years. That's like maybe half of the work that's involved in the whole thing. Like, you've got planning, you've got bedrock preparation, you've got causeways, you've got structures, you've got the basalt pavement, you've got the valley temple, you've got the pyramid temple.
Yeah.
So much stuff. And planning just that's going to take years. So I'm pretty skeptical that these things were done in the lifetime of a king or whatever. I think even the Grand Egyptian Museum has taken longer to build than supposedly the pyramids did.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny.
Is.
Yeah, but this plateau is full of chambers, tunnels, everything. It was very interesting to hear about that I don't know how long ago, but they drilled in front of the Sphinx and they found a granite, which is strange because the bedrock is limestone.
That's right. Yeah, Zahi Hawass documented in one of his books. I talk about it in my couple of videos, but he went down, I think 16 meters. So at the front of the Sphinx temple, there's like a 4 or 5 inch, post hole and a bit of concrete. But that was a drilling experiment that he did. He reported on it in I think it was maybe a paper he wrote about the harbor in front of the Valley Temple. And he says, 16 meters down, we hit red granite. We brought up flakes of worked red granite. That's where the drill stopped. I mean,
isn't it the most interesting discovery ever?
Yeah. I mean, it's not natural. There's a granite block down there. Who knows?
Yeah. Probably some construction or...
Well, they do say, it might have fallen off a boat. I'm like, it's you're drilling through bedrock.
And they left it there.
Well, it's just a hole. Right, yeah. I mean, how does it fall through bedrock to get, but then, obviously I think there's extremely strong evidence that there's chambers beneath the Sphinx. I mean, there's been 2 ground-penetrating radar surveys done of it. John Anthony West and Robert Schock did one. The Shore Expedition did another one. Boris Said was involved in both of them. He talked about both of them showed regular large chambers beneath the Sphinx. Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass say, no, it's just natural bedrock cracks. I mean, there's been one, when it comes to drilling under the Sphinx, there's been one, acknowledged kind of experiment for doing that, but you can find evidence of drilling experiments that go back to the 70s. There's been like 4 or 5 of them, all private and secretive, and Edgar Cayce Foundation stuff. It's a fascinating history of excavation and exploration that's happened up here.
Have you heard about the theory of Robert Schneiker? He's a geologist, and he pointed out that its supposed date for the Sphinx creation, 9,000 BC or around 9,000 BC, it couldn't happened because it was during the humid African period.
Yes.
And the Nile, the branch of the Nile was up till the neck of the Sphinx or even higher.
I didn't see that in the paper. So I'm familiar with it's called the Aramat branch.
That's a new one. I think that's a recent discovery, but he was talking about this long before this Aramat.
So I'm not familiar with his research. It's interesting, but I believe that the recent studies have shown that the branch of the Nile, that it turns out all of these pyramid sites from Abu Rawash, I think, down to Maidum, were built on essentially the valley temples were built right on the banks of the Aramat branch, which is an extinct branch of the Nile that was only there during the African humid period, which ended like 5,000, somewhere between 5,000 and 4,000 BC or something. So almost 1,000 years before the beginning of the Old Kingdom, and you wouldn't have had these floods then either. Like it would have been, because there's so much more regular rainfall in northern Africa. The Sahara was a
lush and green.
It was a savanna, lake basins and river systems, and you had enough water and rain, rain shed sort of watershed area to support a much larger Nile with these branches, like the Aramat branch, which in some places was almost a mile wide, like a big branch of the Nile. And it makes more sense to me if you're going to build a harbour to build it next to the river.
Yeah.
So it's like to me it's suggestive that maybe these pyramid complexes were begun and they were built on the banks of this river. So I'm a little, honestly, even a little skeptical about how much water, even during the inundation period in the current climate, when it shifted after the African humid period, how far that water actually went. Was it really up to all the way to the Valley Temple? How much water? And was it only it's 3 months? I
think also UnchartedX Matt made a video on this.
He did recently, I think, yeah.
No, I mean on the paper of Robert Schneiker.
Okay. I'll have to look at it. I haven't
seen it. other thing, Schneiker said that the wicking salty water from the bedrock was naturally eroding this limestone, and the pattern we can see there, these are from the construction, because it was so porous and
the vertical fissures, you mean?
Yeah,
that's what he's talking about.
And also these erosion-like features on the Sphinx.
Yeah,
probably I'm not quoting him accurately, but
we'll get cherry picked for that. It's fine. This is a conversation. We're not reading out of textbooks. It's fine. There's a lot of theory. It's interesting. I tend to trust the perspectives of professional geologists and guys like Schock that have an opinion. Randall Carlson also has a pretty compelling presentation looking at the erosion in the walls of the Sphinx enclosure and the Sphinx itself. I think observationally you can make some interesting just conclusions and observations when you look at it. I mean, I understand that there's different layers, the sedimentary layers will vary in hardness, right? So your erosion patterns differ based on the hardness of individual layers of this sediment. And of course, the Yardang that the Sphinx was made from, the hardest limestone seems to be the head, that area.
Yeah.
It's colored differently. However, I do think it's a little telling that the degree of erosion that you can see on the parts of the body that are still exposed that haven't been repaired. I mean, you've got repairs even from the Old Kingdom there, right through the Romans and modern repairs. And you've got the walls of the enclosure. And some of those layers are relatively hard too, but it's like a lot of this gets attributed to wind and sand in the modern perspective on it. Like, well, assuming Khufu carved it, it must be wind and sand. What's interesting about it is even Thutmose IV, like the dream stele, they talked about there that is, it's buried up to his chest and neck in sand, and uncover me and you'll become king, is that what the stele says. And you can, Salim Hassan was one of the first, and Kavilia was the first to really relatively modern times, like 150 years ago, to excavate that area. And 10 years later, or even a couple of years later, it's buried again. Like, it's just the sand fills it up. So it's difficult to explain, considering there's been thousands of years where the body and the walls of the enclosure were buried in sand, that it's wind and sand erosion. And if it is wind and sand erosion, the one part of the Sphinx that's always been above the sand, its head, it doesn't show anything like the erosion that you see on the enclosure walls or the the body of the Sphinx. And I know that limestone is a little bit harder, but still, it's like, I think it's pretty compelling and obvious that that head was recarved, the proportions are off.
It's a bit sus, yeah.
It's a bit sus. The whole thing's a bit sus, and there's a lot of different opinions about the Sphinx. And it is some compelling evidence, but one of the other things that discussion on erosion led me to was kind of a wider investigation into erosional features all up and down the plateau. And I think there's some really compelling evidence in the erosional features of other supposed Fourth Dynasty structures that is very suggestive that some of that stuff's way older than Fourth Dynasty. I mean, I did a video recently about it. I mean, just comparing, I think all you have to do is go and compare the erosion of features like the Valley Temple of the Middle Pyramid Complex, or even the higher parts of, the Mortuary Temple, the Pyramid Temple, and the higher parts of the Valley Temple that were above the sand. These megalithic, massive blocks of limestone that were cased in granite with huge erosional features, like 2 feet of erosion. Same thing at the Menkaure Pyramid, the third pyramid. You can compare those to other supposed, I think, legitimate Fourth Dynasty structures, like the Western Cemetery, for example. All of the structures that run up and down on the side of the causeway. You can compare those erosional features, and a lot of those Fourth Dynasty structures made from smaller blocks, same material, limestone, was never cased in granite. And frankly, like the Western Cemetery, it's in great condition. Like it just doesn't show anything like the erosion that you see on the megalithic stuff that was cased in granite.
Yeah.
Yet they'll tell you that, either this is the same people in the same time frame, or in the case of the Valley Temple, or the Mortuary or Pyramid Temple up near the Middle Pyramid Complex, they tell you that is younger than the Western Cemetery, because Khufu, even generation, but he supposedly built that before this stuff was built. Now, Western Cemetery behind the Great Pyramid's in great condition. Same elevation level as the Mortuary Temple, same material, smaller blocks, great stonework, sure, but this is like massive megalithic blocks that were also cased in granite, which would have protected it. Yet this massive megalithic structure has just huge amounts of erosion to the point where the structure itself is falling apart from it. And I just think the difference becomes really palpable and obvious when you start to look at those erosional differences, and it just lines up with this different architectural style, massive megalithic cased in granite, very eroded.
Cased in granite, it's like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And how? That's another very interesting question.
Dude.
Do you think it was a dynastic work, the casing itself?
The granite casing?
Yeah.
No.
No?
I don't think so. No, I think this, even the granite has, I think it's a avenue I'd like to pursue at some point, but I think there's plenty of evidence for some severe erosion on even the granite that is probably suggestive that it is older than that. I don't think they had the capability for some of the granite work to do it, frankly. I think there's the big blocks. I think that stuff's older. I do. And again, not to say that it wasn't worked on later on and either renovated, repaired, extended. There's actually evidence for that in that Mortuary Temple, which is actually a huge structure. It's bigger than the Valley Temple. There were more pillars. It's a much bigger structure, but there's actually, you can see where there was Fourth Dynasty modifications made to it with like a lower quality of limestone, smaller blocks, where they were doing something to it, extending it or maybe repairing it. I mean, it's possible that when they found a lot of this stuff, it could have been in a state of disrepair already. We don't really know. I mean, it seems to me that if you just look at the erosional rates, the studies into limestone erosion, and you try to explain like a foot or 2 feet of erosion into limestone like that, I mean, that limestone has to have been exposed for a very long time. I mean, the minimal dates of in the 12,000. This is like in water environments, like wave action, coastal environments, rivers.
You can test this.
Well, it's been tested. There's studies. I mean, it's still but to get 2 feet of erosion in limestone like that in a river, where it's like, this is a highly erosive environment, your water running over it all the time, or coastal limestone where it's like wave action pounding it all the time, or just water sloshing on it. To get 2 feet of erosion, you're still looking at like 10 to 12,000 years. That's already outside the time frame of dynastic Egypt. Now, if you just look at regular weathering, wind and rain and I mean, the time frame stretched right out to over more than 100,000 years to get that sort of erosion. And there's been many studies showing this in limestone of that type. And this is not soft limestone, it's nummulitic limestone. So, I think the erosion, I think there's a lot to be done on that erosion topic yet.
What do you think about the several theories about the pyramids? So, are you familiar with Jeffrey Drum?
Yes. I mean, I'm familiar with his work. I've not met him, but Land of Chem, the channel.
Exactly. What do you think about that?
I honestly don't know that much about it.
Because it's the opposite of not slightly, but kind of the opposite of Chris Dunn's work. Or the theory of
the chemical
Chris Dunn.
Productions. I mean, a lot of people seem, I can tell you, I mean, a lot of people seem very interested and compelled by his ideas. They're great. I mean, I'm open to any of those theories that, just bear testing out. I mean, I don't, like me, I don't have a theory, this is like, I tend to ask more questions and just, I'm trying to point out the challenges with the mainstream perspective, and I'm generally advocating for more of that type of work. And it takes, I think, people like Jeffrey Drum and like Chris Dunn that have the expertise in particular fields to go and suggest a theory and then, go test it, like figure out how you can advance it, like just do it honestly and make it, just make sure that, figure it out. Is it right? Is it not? Do you need to modify it? Where do you go? And I mean, I'm pleased that there's those theories out there and that they're gaining popularity and they're being explored. Like I said, I think that's the only way we're going to eventually find as close as get as close as we can to the truth. I'm not necessarily convinced that we'll ever get to the real truth. I don't know. It's so difficult and it's just such a murky field in terms of the evidence is scant and it's been so heavily modified, and it's just, thousands of years of renovation and reuse and then thousands of years more of destruction and quarrying, and it's I don't know that we necessarily have enough evidence to really get to the truth until we invent a time machine and go back and look. But I mean, I'm open to all those ideas is what I'd say. So
we have been recently in the Black Pyramid.
We have.
That was also your first time there, right?
Yeah, everyone's first time in the Black Pyramid yesterday.
What's your take on that? Is it dynastic?
I think so. I do. Yeah, I do think it's dynastic. Then this is like seat of the pants, perspective. And I've not done a lot of research into it, but I mean, it's very impressive, like labyrinthian nature.
So
all these
tiny passages and
I was
even they had the big granite boxes in there.
Yeah, well, there were granite boxes, and I do think those granite boxes probably were hand. You could see the hammering marks on them. They seem to have been
dynastic work.
Probably dynastic. Yeah, you tend to see when you see the glyphs. I mean, you see the eyeballs on it. I mean, they're not polished like the other ones. That you can see the chisel marks. Like, I didn't put it this way. I didn't see anything down there that I think necessarily suggested that they weren't capable of doing that in that Middle Kingdom period. It's not, it's small, like the limestone construction. It's not massive megalithic granite. It definitely seemed like it was intended for burials down there. There's all these different chambers. I mean, it's impressive. There's so many. I wasn't aware of that many, like with the curved roof.
So all of those chambers are like arched.
Yeah, beautiful arched roofs in all of those little chambers. It's a mud brick pyramid. They had built that mud brick over the top. Like, it was obviously like an excavation that they had then built this stuff in there, and then they sealed it, and then they're like piling up mud bricks and eventually building a pyramid on top of it.
But we were only underground, not above, right? So
it felt like it. Yeah, I mean, I was wondering. I've not seen the schematics for it, but it felt like, we went down, and I think it's mostly just underneath the ground level, a lot of that stuff, but underneath the pyramid. And my seat of the pants opinion on the Black Pyramid was, I think it's dynastic work. I mean, again, Yusuf Status and I agree that you shouldn't underestimate the capabilities of the dynastic Egyptians. They're capable of, some amazing works. And a lot of these industries became high art forms. I mean, even at Luxor, I used to think that all of the statues at Luxor were probably pre-dynastic and they weren't capable of it. But over the years of visiting, you can see subtle differences, and you can see where things, like this is like an imitation one of this one over here, and there's massive differences in the actual stone, the finishing and the polishing, and there's the minute details that's where you see, okay, this stuff is way more challenging than what this looks like, even though from a distance they look very similar. That some of these are dynastic, I think. So it's a constant evolution of looking at those things. So I try not to underestimate what the dynastic Egyptians were capable of. And as far as I can tell, I do think that the Black Pyramid was, probably a dynastic construction, like the Step Pyramid.
And it was very interesting to see.
It was. What did you think?
My idea was that those boxes were probably made by hand. It was not... I didn't see those very edgy corners or very polished and nice carvings. But my first question was how they... Jesus.
Welcome to Egypt, bro.
Honky tonk.
Honky Town. Yeah, this is it. It's still going.
So I just didn't know how they get those boxes down there. Probably they had to build the tunnels and then put the boxes and then finish it off.
Oh yeah, I for sure they would have lowered them in and then built on top. I mean, how much do you reckon those boxes they weigh? He probably have it. Yusuf over here probably have an idea. I mean, they might have been 10 or 12 tons. Maybe not much more than that total. I don't think that's all doable. Like I don't think that's too much of a stretch. I mean, and it's just, they have decorative features. They had high relief, the eyes on them.
Yeah.
They had the facade,
very nice bottom.
the facade of the false doors facade on them, and I mean that seemed to me to be an indication of, okay, this is a box used as a burial. And then
it was very similar to the box they found in a Menkaure pyramid.
Yeah.
I mean, those facade carvings.
Yeah, I have to look. I haven't seen. There must be pictures of it because that thing's on the bottom of the
there's
Mediterranean,
a drawing
right?
I saw.
Yeah.
But it just reminded me of that box.
I did like that. I did notice that this is to me was like a glaring difference between, say, the Serapeum box with all the writing. It's like that nice high relief, the eyeballs. Like that's when they're making a box for that purpose. That's what it looks like. It doesn't look like the Serapeum box where it's just like hammered, shitty, carving in the damn thing. Yeah.
Well, we have some more work to be done.
There is
so
indeed.
We have to go to Lahoun.
We do, yeah. Let's get out to Lahoun.
And thanks a lot for this conversation.
No, it was great.
It was
Thank
amazing.
You. Yeah.
I'm very honored
to
sit here with you and you just dragged me into this entire world, and then I try to research the stuff I'm really interested in from a scientific point of view, and that's what I'm trying to do with Adam. I think the vases are just smoking gun to me. I mean,
well, me too.
It's interesting that so many engineers are just sucked into this topic.
Yep.
And it's amazing. And thanks for this entire journey.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was an honor for me too. And I look forward to seeing your channel grow. So as we proceed, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of all the work. And I think what you're doing is amazing. Like the super admirable is just sort of getting hands on and getting involved and getting data, man. I'm super happy to see it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, man.
A massive thank you to my incredible supporters, Oniku, Oannes, Sarah Cox, Vasana, and Sevenrin. Your generosity fuels this journey into ancient technology, keeping this show alive and pushing my research further than ever. As the ancient Egyptians would say, Ankh Veja Seneb.